So, when I talk about things like the four tendencies or the Enneagram, inevitably someone will ask me, but is it valid? Like, is it actually real? Do we know if it's actually measuring what it says it is? Is it reliable? And I get the desire to ask these questions. And I think it's an honest question and we should be asking. So today I want to talk about whether personality tests are valid. And I'm going to actually offer up the four questions that I ask when it comes to figuring out whether this personality test is actually worth your time. Now, if we have not met yet, I am Kat and I help people figure out the hidden reasons that they're stuck so they can break free and start thriving. So let's get into it. Let's talk about personality tests. Now, there are so many personality tests. I was trying to prepare a list and I realized it's just too big. But when we typically think about personality tests, a number of them come to mind. So perhaps you think about MBTI. That's a really big one, the Myers-Briggs. I often talk about the Enneagram and the four tendencies. There's also the disc profile. There's the big five. There are the colors. There's directions. There are all sorts of personality tests. There's also a bunch named after some people, but I'm not as familiar with those. So when you're considering all of these, you want to ask, well, is it actually going to help me? But the big question people ask, is it valid? Now, when I studied organizational development in school, we were taught that the only one that is actually valid and reliable is the big five. And if you are not familiar with the big five and you've never heard of it, it's a scale basically that shows how people land on these five measures. So the degree to which they are open, agreeable, extroverted, conscientious, and neurotic. So the big five, I get that there is scientific process that backs up that this is indeed a reliable personality test. The problem with it when I was studying and learning about it is I thought, what's the so what and the now what? So yeah, it might tell me that I am more open than another person who might be less open, or I'm more agreeable than another person who is less agreeable. Or maybe I'm more neurotic than another person. But then I thought, well, what do I do with that? And so I personally found that it just wasn't as helpful as I had hoped or I had wanted. So, what I have decided over the years is to ask four questions for myself about whether or not a personality test is helpful. And the reason I am switching to that is that when you look at something like the Big Five, this might be valid and reliable. Valid meaning it's actually measuring what it says it measures, and reliable meaning you could replicate this over and over. So here's what I think. This is just my opinion. You can take it or leave it. First question you should ask is, are you actually learning something? So is it teaching you something about yourself? Even if the test is not 100% valid or you can't replicate it all the time, are you getting insight? Is it making you reflect on yourself and how you behave and how you show up in the world and how you interact with others? So I would say, is it giving you new insights? Maybe you're having an aha moment. I know when I learned about the four tendencies, which is a younger framework, I had a big aha moment. I had never really considered that I respond differently to internal expectations as I do to external expectations. That was a really big aha, and it explained a lot of the stuff that was going on. So that's really important to me. The other thing is, does it actually describe pretty accurately how you operate? Like when you have a valuable personality test, it's one that's speaking your language. When it says, hey, this is what you do, and you say, oh my God, yeah, I do that. That is completely me. And many of the personality tests I've taken over the years do a pretty good job of that. The other thing is it should probably tell you a little bit about your habits and your patterns because it tells us how we operate, how we show up. Our personality is a lot of the things that we do unconsciously. And those unconscious things are often these habits and these patterns. So is it giving us insight into our habits and patterns and those of others? The other thing is it should give you some insight into why you do something, your motivation. Why do I act the way I do? Why do I keep doing this thing over and over and over again? I think a personality test is helpful when it gives you insight into the why. What's driving our behavior? I think that's valuable. And then the other thing is that it should give you some context for what's going on, maybe understanding a certain situation and understanding maybe why you show up one way in one circumstance, but maybe another in a different circumstance. It kind of provides you this framework where you can see yourself better. So that's the first thing. Are you learning something about yourself? That to me is helpful. Even if this test is not 100% vetted by science, are you learning something about yourself? Are you reflecting? And do you have new insights about you and how you operate? All right, the next one, are you learning something about other people? Because we're not lone wolves. We are around other people, whether that is our family or our coworkers or our friends, and we all know that we show up differently. And sometimes we think, why do they do that? I cannot understand why they do that. Why do they respond to me that way? Why do they always act this way? It can be utterly confusing. And so when you have a personality test that explains different types of behaviors and how people show up differently, to me, that's useful. And it also means that we are reflecting on how we show up differently with other people so that we can recognize those differences. So it should be able to describe these differences and how they actually show up in real life. Like, what does this actually do? And what are the implications for this? And it should add some context to our situations. I had a really great insight early on when I was learning about introversion and extroversion. And while I'm kind of in the middle. I seem quite introverted or extroverted, but I got some introversion in me. And I was working with people, and my boss at the time, when I was really learning to understand it, was very introverted. And we would have our one-on-one meetings, and she would be sitting there quietly. And so I interpreted that as, okay, well, she's got nothing to say right now. I'll just keep filling the space. So I just kept talking because that's how I interpreted her silence. But the more I learned just how introverted she was, I realized she was processing what I was saying, and she was trying to develop what she wanted to say inside, because she would formulate her responses internally before she would actually tell me. Whereas I tend to just talk it out. And when I understood this, I was then able to just sit in the silence. It was not the most comfortable at first, but I recognized that I need to give her space. It provided context for these conversations that I always felt, why does she have nothing to offer? And that's not true. She had things to offer, but she just took her time and she wanted to really think it through. And that was really valuable for me. So not only do I understand more about myself and how I process information and how I maybe talk things through out loud, that other people don't do that, and that I needed to make the space for that and recognize when that's happening. The other thing is you want to make sure that you do know how to adjust and work with other people, and you can recognize these things. And so the personality test that gives you tools for maybe appreciating these differences, noticing these differences, and you don't always have to understand exactly why someone does the thing they do, but I think you make more space for it when you have that deeper understanding. So that's the second question. Does it help you understand others? Okay, what's the next one? So is there a skill set that they're teaching you so you can grow and develop? Because here's the truth. If you have a personality test that just says, this is how you act, this is who you are, and that's it, to me, that is a recipe for resignation of just saying, well, that's who I am. That's the way it is. Take it or leave it. And to me, that's not helpful. So I am looking for a personality test that gives me tools for growth. How do I improve myself? How do I work in spite of these habits and these patterns and these driving motivations, maybe some of these fears and desires, things that are driving me? And seeing these habits and patterns, how do I maybe rise above them? How do I work against my preferences and my tendencies when I'm called to do so? And how do I work with myself when I understand myself better? There should be these opportunities for growth. Now, a simple example is that the 4 Tendencies framework teaches us about external and internal expectations. And when I found out I was an obliger, someone who is really great at meeting external expectations, but kind of sucks at the internal expectations, I resist those. I realized if I have my own personal goal, it's best for me to turn it into an external expectation, for me to use outer accountability as a tool that works with me and the fact that I have a tendency to resist those inner expectations. So it should be giving you tools for growth. Likewise, the Enneagram, which if you know anything about me, you know I love the Enneagram. It really reinforces being present and to tap into paying attention to the here and now, noticing your body, your heart, and your head and bringing those together. And I find that when I'm conscious and I'm awake and I am thinking of these things, I can rise above some of these pesky habits that I've developed over the years. I can make a more informed and more conscious decision and be more present. And this personality framework gives me specific tools and strategies to do just that. And to me, I think that is incredibly valuable. The way I summarize it is that if it's going to help you, there should be a so what and a now what. The so what is, hey, this is your personality, this is how you act and operate. So what? Why does this matter? What does it tell me? So it should tell you how you interact, how you show up, how it might stop you and hold you back, what are your gifts, etc. And then the now what is, what do I do about that? So how do I grow? How do I become a better version of myself without necessarily trying to completely change and overhaul me, but to maybe rise above some of these defenses and patterns that I've developed over the years? I can understand why, and I can grow and rise above that. To me, that is valuable. Even if it's not 100% backed by science, if it can teach you to grow, to be more patient, more compassionate, and to take some steps to actually turn this into action and transform yourself, that goes a long way for me. So finally, what's the fourth thing? It's all about, does it give you more of an appreciation for yourself and for other people? So when I say this, I mean, are you understanding more why someone shows up the way they do? Are you getting a better feel for why they operate how they do and why you do? Because when you actually understand the driving forces and what is behind a person's actions, you can have more compassion. Understanding leads to compassion. We can say, oh, of course they would act this way. They're maybe worried about this happening. Of course they would go out of their way to help another person before they help themselves. This is something that really matters to them because of the way that they see the world. Yes, of course they're going to be quieter and more reserved and take their time answering my question because they need that time to process. So the more we can learn about people, including ourselves, the more we can show more compassion. And to me, I think that's incredibly important, especially when elements of our personality drive us bananas. So maybe we hate these habits and these patterns that we've seen ourselves develop over the years, and we think it's infuriating, but we can't seem to stop. Well, when we get that insight and understanding as to what's driving it, we can be kinder to ourselves and show ourselves more grace. In addition to growing, we want those growth strategies, but we also just want to be kind to ourselves. And we want to be kind to other people. So that to me is incredibly important. But the other thing, because I'm talking a lot about compassion, which is usually what we want to use if someone's struggling or they have an irritating habit, is we want to be more compassionate and more patient and give ourselves grace. At the same time, when we learn about ourselves, we can also appreciate our gifts. What are we talented at? What are the things that we really bring to the table? And that maybe when we show up in a group, this is something that we have to offer that's a strength of ours. So when you can reflect on and appreciate the things that you're really talented with, that to me is also such a gift that you can actually get from a personality test. So when someone says to me, yeah, but is it valid? I get where they're coming from. And I understand that desire to say, has this been vetted? Is this the real deal? Or is this just some garbage that I'm getting into? Well, my 4 questions, I think, are the type of thing that you can ask yourself in any situation. So maybe you don't have the science to back it up, but if you are learning about a personality system, can you answer those questions? Do you understand yourself? Do you understand others? Are there strategies for growth? And does it give you more appreciation for who you are and how you act, you and others? That to me is just so powerful. And so that's my suggestion if you're wondering or you're concerned about the validity of a personality test. What are the benefits? What are the things that it actually helps? And I want to remind you that if you are curious about the Enneagram in particular, I put together a free PDF that gives you some insight into how you can discover which type you might be. I've got some simple questions and some instructions that you can follow on this 3-page free PDF. And I will have the link so that you can grab that if this is something that you're interested in. In particular, I love the Enneagram. I feel like it's so rich with explaining why we do things, why we show up the way we do, and it really, really pushes us to transform and rise above. One of the things that one of my teachers says all the time with the Enneagram is, you have a personality, you aren't your personality. So how do we be the best version of ourselves by understanding our personality, but understanding also who we truly are at the core? I hope that these 4 questions give you something to think about when it comes to considering whether or not a personality test is indeed valid.